So I want to welcome you all here tonight, late night for some of you. My name is Dan Huff, and I'm the Director of Public Programs and Community Engagement at the Studio Museum in Harlem. And we are so thrilled to be collaborating with MoMA for today's program, Kahlil Robert Irving in Conversation with André Brock and Simone White. So this conversation marks the second of two public programs that Studio and MoMA collaborated on in support of projects Kahlil Robert Irving. The first program was titled Slow Motion, Slow Build, Slow Read, and that took place on April 5th and was facilitated by educator C.J. Mitchell and poet Adjoa Gargi and Zinga Greaves. And it encouraged participants to engage with Kahlil's piece, Black and Yellow Caution, in three ways: looking, collaging, and writing. And we're going to switch screens now because we'd love to share some of the collages and poems that were created by our participants that were inspired by Kahlil's art and his spoken words. And those slides, I'm just going to start reading some poems. And so think about Kahlil's work, and as we recite, to set a tone. Next slide. How to traverse the bridge that remains unanchored to any landscape, leap between lost edges, persist within the simultaneous mind. Next slide. I traverse the landscape towards my mother, who is listening. I feel the burning relationship of joy captured. Next slide. Next slide. Precariously anchored, the photographic memorial of both my mother and my father, wrapped in colonial material. Next slide. Next slide. We try to walk with joy, unending memories, push us to extreme experiences, building fullness of meaning with every step of existence. Next slide. Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, wait. I'm not done. So tonight's program offers a furthering of those explorations of slowness, of deep readings and explorations, of seeing, thinking, and responding to Kahlil's practice from a multitude of perspectives. And now I'd like to pass things off to Hannah Fagan of MoMA for some housekeeping.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much, Jayon. I was just so excited to introduce today's program. And it's a deep honor to be in collaboration with the Studio Museum in Harlem for this program series. And I'm pleased to share a few notes on today's gathering that we hope will make this experience as accessible as possible for you. If we could have the next slide, please. So in this program, live captioning is available by clicking on the CC live transcript button and selecting show subtitles. Thanks to Cheryl and Tim, ASL Interpretation is available for tonight's program. We recommend you pin the interpreter on your screen to ensure that you can access ASL Interpretation throughout the program. We are recording tonight's event, so if you prefer not to be recorded, please turn off your video, but if you are comfortable, we invite you to keep your video on to foster a collective spirit, but always do what's best for you. And Lastly, we invite you to use the chat to share thoughts, questions, or request technical assistance. We will read questions out loud at the Q&A portion of the program. And as you share, a gentle reminder to please make sure you also leave and create space for others to do the same. We ask you to be mindful of your privileges you may hold as we work together to create an environment where everyone feels welcome. And fair warning, we will not tolerate any behavior or speech that abuses others. And now I'll pass it back to Dayan, who will share more about the incredible moderator of tonight's program. And with that, we could drop the slides down.
Thank you, Hannah. André Brock is an associate professor of media studies at Georgia Tech. He writes on Western technoculture, Black technoculture, and digital media. His scholarship examines Black and white representations in social media, video games, weblogs, and other digital media. He has also published influential research on digital research methods. His award-winning book, Distributed Blackness, African American Cybercultures, theorizes Black everyday lives mediated by networked digital technologies. And just a note, as Hannah mentioned, there will be a brief question and answer moment after the conversation facilitated by Studio's Melania Graham. So please drop questions in the chat as they come. André, the space is yours to guide.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dayan and Hannah, for pulling all of this together. I'd like to also thank MoMA and the Studio Museum of Art of Harlem for inviting me to moderate this amazing conversation, soon to be amazing conversation, between myself, Kahlil Robert Irving, and Simone White. And so let me introduce my two artists / interlocutors. Kahlil Robert Irving is an artist living and working in the US. He attended the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Art, Washington University in St. Louis, where he attained his MFA, and the Kansas City Art Institute, where he attained his Bachelor of Fine Arts. His work has been exhibited at the Nerman Museum of Contemporary Art, which is in Overland Park, Kansas, the Arizona State University Art Museum in Tempe, Arizona, and the Rhode Island School of Design Museum, among others. Irving presented a group of new sculptures in the new museum 2021 Triennial Soft Water Hard Stone, and he is currently presenting a beautiful large-scale commission in the lobby of the Contemporary Arts Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. Our other interlocutor, my other guest, is Simone White, the author of On Being the Other Woman, which is forthcoming with Duke University Press in 2022. She's also written Dear Angel of Death, which came out on Ugly Duckling Press in 2018. Of Being Dispersed, which is on Future Poem and came out in 2016. House Envy of All the World, which came out on the Factory School Press in 2010. The poetry chapbook Unrest, which also came out on Ugly Duckling Press in 2013. And the collaborative poem painting chapbook Dolly with Kim Thomas on QAB in 2008. Her honors include a 2021 Creative Capital Award, a 2017 Whiting Award in Poetry, I'm going to mispronounce this, Cave Canem Foundation Fellowships, and recognition as a New American Poet for the Poetry Society of America in 2013. She is the Stephen M. Gorn Family Assistant Professor of English at the University of Pennsylvania, and unfortunately lives in Brooklyn because I'm from Queens and Queens represents. I couldn't resist, Simone, I'm sorry. So I'm gonna be real basic. I'm gonna start off basic and I think we'll be able to build from there. So I see materiality in your work, Kahlil, which is easy to say because you do sculpture, but I also see it in the way you do digital collages, right? And Simone, from what I understand of your poetry and the way folk interpret it, I see a fascination with utterances, which I also understand as material. So I want to ask either of the two of you, I don't care who starts first, but I want you to talk about what materiality means for Blackness.
Thank you so much for that nice introduction. And it's such a pleasure to be here with everyone this evening in New York and around the world. Materiality and relationship and for Blackness is, I was in the museum today actually speaking with someone and they were just like, thank you so much for making this work and bringing it here. And I said, you know, putting this together not only by my hands, but also recognizing the time that's been invested to make a lot of these things available to me in terms of the material of the sculptural, like how I make the sculptures and what I make the sculptures out of, or any of the artworks that I'm producing, that I said, like all of this in the layers of the abstractions of what we're wrestling with in the exhibition is like space for invention, and in invention and survival is a material, but it's like a facet of life that is very close to our experience as beings and as a part of a larger culture. So material for Blackness for me is like, it's the opportunity or the capacity of invention, but also just space for manipulation that we work on and work with, that is in this space of working towards a certain sense of freedom. I think materiality for Blackness is the desire or working towards freedom.
I love that. Simone?
You started with a really hard question. So materiality, is I think the question of what surrounds experience. It's what we live in and with. And for me, I think it also has to do with freeing oneself from certain kinds of ideological associations with materiality, including, trying to sort of back up or back away from the idea that all that is material has to do with capitalism. And so it also contains a sense of sensuousness and feeling, and the ways in which we can experience things that, are not of the world even sometimes. And trying to account for those things like as a matter of attunement, so that like materiality becomes an interactive thing rather than a thing that's all about things that are external to the body or, the mind.
There's a piece you wrote, Simone, and I can't remember the exact name of it because I read it real fast. But there's something you said that struck me, in that in some ways, the form of poetry, the words, often feel like a material construct that's carceral, like they lock you into certain forms of expression. Is there something you could help me, could you help me parse that, help me understand that a little bit?
Yeah, I could try.
If I said it wrong, let me know.
I don't remember most of the things I said. I believe that I said that. But let's see. So if we think about how, I always tell people this, that every word, if you're a poet, seems to have like a whole life, and none of them seem established. And so one of the things is like a blessing and a curse, like every word is kind of buzzing with the possibility that it doesn't mean what you think it means. And so, in a way, every word is a prison because the obligation, to use it the way everybody else is using it, to be understood, is a kind of trap. And so there's this possibility that the word might do something else if you give it the opportunity.
Right.
And so, yeah. And so that's like what the whole enterprise is for me, to free them to do as they might wish to do outside of their, their confines. And also we don't know what they will do. And so, to put words in a situation where they have opportunity to create something that you actually, that has never been said before, possibly. I mean, that's like a high bar, but in some ways, nothing has ever been said before. So there's like, it's both like really high and really not. It's like the dumbest thing you could possibly do. And, and then if you live, with a certain kind of, some things I like can't remember what I did yesterday, but I remember stuff I read like 15 years ago. So you know, there's also the pressure of all the things. So,
And one example I think that it comes to my mind is like your poem called "Don't Nuzzle Me, Fucker Maker," and like it just like there's a certain level of, and when you describe how you described everything, along with listening to you read poems and then listening to other people read poems and listening to other people try to decipher your poetry, thinking about the alliteration, some aspects of some things that to some people may be jarring, the repetition, and then the sound rhythms that you construct are very much, I can like really understand what you just said through having heard and listened. And it's really, it's very emotional for me, because I feel like the goal of a lot of what I'm trying to wrestle with in my sculptures is very similar to what you just described, but in a imagistic and physical three-dimensional sense.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you brought that there, because I wanted to ask you that, because you referred to invention, right? And when you were talking about materiality, and I wonder what it is about the found objects that you incorporate in your sculptures that lead itself to this invention and materiality.
Well, I have to say, nothing is found in my sculptures.
Okay.
Everything in my sculptures is constructed by me in the studio.
That's even more awesome. That comes out of your head?
Well, I'm anchoring a lot of references to history. So I'm seeing historical European ceramics that are appropriating a trajectory of Asian production that were made for a European market where Asia didn't necessarily want to fill, but they did start to produce other things that then led to a cultural significance, all very different than what they were necessarily making for themselves. Speaking about Asia in a conglomerate, but I'm talking about China, Japan, and Korea ceramic production specifically. And then I buy decals or image transfers from eBay that look like European porcelain decorations. And then the sculptures are all made wet, and then they dry, and then I glaze them, then I fire them again. And then all the surface information is maybe applied over 8 to 12 to 30 firings in the kiln. So the goal is for the ceramic to exist as if it is something that it's not.
So would the word assemblage fit into what it is that you're doing?
Yeah. I mean, it's like assemblage of abstractions, assemblage of object in the studio or material in the studio. But it's growing from a history of Los Angeles Black assemblage sculptors. It's thinking, I'm like trying to wrestle with many histories at the same time to make the work. And the goal of maybe there's new language to then describe them. And that's partially why I have been very excited to think and be in a space to hear Simone also talk about her work, because it's a way to maybe there's a viewfinder that I'll find to describe what I'm doing in a whole nother way.
Can I ask?
And I have to say,
oh, sorry.
I just want to say thank you to Legacy Russell too for also suggesting you as
Absolutely. Shout out to Legacy.
Yeah, she's in Venice right now, but I think she's here.
What
you gonna ask?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask about the familiar object in general. Like, you know, one of the most interesting things or the thing that maybe attracted my attention most was the upside down like soda bottle, which I think is ceramic. Yes. And I guess jarring is an interesting word that you just used. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about objects like that. What does this sort of ordinary trash object have to offer a sense of of reassemblage or something like that? Like what can we do with those things that have been discarded? I'm just very curious to hear you talk about that. And then also to think about what it means to fashion that object anew. Like why make it over?
The ceramic objects in the sculptures that look like something recognizable initially was the means to give the viewer access to the certain level of scale that the object, the overall object that they may be viewing, because the objects they look like things that are being catalyzed together. Not that they're excavated from the earth and it's rubble, but that it's fashioned as if it's like, or forced together, compressed by a certain kind of energy. And so as I've continued, I'm shedding old ways of engaging and trying to bring on new ways of engaging form and object. I don't know any like throwaway object that looks as clean as my soda bottle upside down in that sculpture, which is weird.
No, that's how I knew it was ceramic.
Right.
Like,
right.
oh no.
Because it's so stern in its physicality. It's not compressed or broken. But refashioning throwaway objects or fragile objects in the sculptures, in one sense, was relating to give the viewer a sense of scale, but then also a big part of remaking soda bottles is, I don't want to make beer cans, but the Mountain Dew special edition set. And so one, like that 2-liter soda bottle and the green upside down soda bottle is a kind of a working towards a new memorial set. And in 2017, I made a sculpture called 7-Pack Memorial. And that 7-pack was referencing and had imagery covered on it, thinking about the murder of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and not too far, like in the suburb of St. Louis. And that's a like space that also occupies something like deeply personal to me, like my grandmother loved soda. And so there's a way for the familial to exist in the work that looks as if it's thrown away or is referencing an ordinary object, but in fact, it's like a place where I see space for someone who doesn't necessarily occupy this space or know what it means to occupy a certain kind of space, to be present, but through something that is familiar to them.
I love that. Hey, Mini-Me, how you doing?
And so these works at the Museum of Modern Art actually have also been made prior to 2021. And so fashioning that sculpture in 2019, the form meant something completely different than necessarily what it would look like of me making something in the studio today.
What is the role of the novel in your work, Kahlil? So some of the found objects you're describing sound like forms of consumer consumption manufacturer, so soda bottles, Chinese takeout boxes and the like. And those forms seem to have solidified over the past 20, 30 years. The materials may have changed, like a can is a can is a can, but we've gone from aluminum to, from iron to aluminum to now plastics and recycled objects. Does the novel, in terms of these objects that you're recreating, have an effect on what you're trying to articulate in your work?
And when you said novel, I heard like story. I didn't even know like the novelty. I heard like, what does it mean for the world building and the story building?
I'll take that too, though, to be real. Let's go there. What stories are you telling? in
a lot of ways, I'm trying to make room for multiple people to engage simultaneously. And I also recognize that they may not necessarily be on the same page while looking. Mm-hmm. And so in some capacity, how can I engage a multitudinal existence or audience? The novel, in terms of like the preciousness or the evolution of material existence in time and space, the sculptures are also working to be a record of someone else's experience, my grandmother's experience. So it's like semi-personal and very specific or local, and what I've seen and where I've been, but then they expand quite a bit more and they can be recognized as regional, they can be recognized as a certain kind of trajectory of the national. So then it is like, in a lot of ways, also a sense of reflection and remembering, or making room for remembrance is very important. So in the novel, that is part of how that, I think, can be extrapolated in the work.
Okay. A related question for either one of y'all. I am currently fascinated in my own work with this concept called the libidinal, right? And I don't necessarily, I definitely run away from French post-structuralists. So I don't care about Deleuze and Guattari. I don't really care about Jung, right? What I do care about for the libidinal is talking about blackness as an excess of life, not constrained by logics or either economic or political, right? But as a way where we generate excess energy in order to deal with the ways that life tries to drain that energy from us, right? And I see that in your work, Kahlil, in the ways that your sculptures kind of refuse to be held to any particular rigid boundary of shape, like they go hither and thither, and I love that. But I also see it in your maddening desktop wallpapers, where you have 5 million things on the desktop, which drives me nuts as a techie, right? On your wallpapers, right? For you, Simone, I got distracted this afternoon by your essay on the whiteness issue, right? Where you go hard on 2 essays that I also love to go hard on, which is Moten Blackness and His Nothingness, and Sexton's anti-blackness. Like you went so hard on it. I was like, yes, sister, yes, right. What does the libidinal mean for you in your work? Like your book coming out is titled "Or I'm the Other Woman," right? What is the libidinal? What does that excess of life mean for you in the work that either of y'all generate?
I would like to talk about like smushing or something, smashing.
Okay. Wait, the tumbler smushing?
I mean, take it any way you want.
No.
There's like, you can't actually get everybody's life experience into a single like grain of anything. That's just impossible. And so, one of the things that I think is really beautiful is when there's like a messy thing. I just find like messy things really gorgeous. And I don't mean like if you look at my house, like I'm like really clean. Like I don't like messes like that. But what I do, I don't have any problem with things that defy explanation. I don't have any, I want to see things that, make me feel like they can't be cleaned up to a single explanation. It's like the relationship even to trying to think about how to think about or write about visual art has like lately been to me all about like the rejection of the idea of ekphrasis or something. It's like, well, I can't be in that kind of a relationship that you want me to be in with the visual. I don't experience exactly the explanatory thing that you want me to experience. What I can do is be adjacent to it. I could be with it. I could be confused by it. I could feel excited by it. I could feel rage, but I actually can't explain this to you. And I feel like that is where I am coming from in my work right now. I feel like that is the sense of Kahlil's, I don't know, there's something about the shiny parts of Kahlil's sculptures that I find very interesting, that the sense that there's a kind of, it's like, there's something very exciting about gold, very exciting. And those little bits of gold, they're thrilling, and even you look at it and it's like, oh, it's like smushed and it's like, what's happening here or whatever. There's a lot of, you can see the processes, but you can't really explain those flashy bits. And it's like, you know, those are the emotional experiences as a poet also that I'm interested in. I really don't care about, you know, thinking about romance, even blackness to a certain degree, right? Like there is the inexplicable, you know, and for me, being a Black woman has been about, you know, always feeling like nothing that's being said to me about my experience really is commensurate with the experience. And, you know, and yeah, and so, and sex and sexuality have everything to do with it for me. That the sense that there is something about gender and sex that can stand for, if not solve the problems of, right, the excessive experience of just like living from day to day as oneself. You know, sex can stand in, I think, for that.
We have lost Kahlil.
No, you didn't lose me. I'm trying to find something because she just brought up gold, but I need to find something because I want to share it with everybody. But I also want to answer your question, you know, like making in the studio and like trying to like deal with these abstractions constantly. There's a certain also level of ecstasiatic experience that one has with making. You know, like it doesn't matter at what level of the process, you could be so enthralled, you almost do have an emotional orgasm. You know, because it's like you like then figured it out. You know, it's not that you have reached a place, but you're there and you then figured it out and you're happy about being present there. And I think that sense of exploratorial engagement is very important and is a part of like a process that is also connecting you to something that's bigger than you, but you also have to be in a place to also recognize that that's like something that is of becoming from you or becoming a part of your experience, which I think is really important. I'm always searching for the ecstasiatic experience in the studio, because that also gives you space to be willing to keep going through it, you know, even if it's hard. Like it's not always going to be so revealing in a way, but there is a place of reveal and you know that it will come. You may not live for it every day. You may not work for specifically that reveal, but somehow you're still enthralled. And making art and being enthralled with making art is exciting because there's many paths by which you can get there. And not only to that place, but also even just getting to a point of where saying like, you can declare yourself as a thing. You can get to a point of declaring. Like I've been making pottery since I was 12. And so it's now been 18 years I've been doing this practice of forming clay on the pottery wheel. And that had a journey, that's a part of a journey that led me to then going to college and then going to study abroad. And so 10 years later, I started through that process of engagement and living, I started to also realize myself or think of determining myself as an artist. And that's like a kind of enunciation in the world. But it may have been super personal, but it still was like, I arrived at something. So I think.
Well, just another sense of like, I don't know. I'm curious to hear, André, what you're going to say about libidinal and why you're so interested in it. But the other thing about desire is that it's not just you, right? It's always got to be involved with others. And yeah, but what are you?
So the libidinal is fascinating to me because of the work that I do studying computer mediated communication. So in my field of research, it's still intensely believe that communication should be rational and efficient, right? And so I was talking to a student today about how we constantly fight back against that as human beings, because we are not ourselves rational, efficient human objects or subjects, right? We always have this layer of affect that goes onto or under or around. So emoticons, emojis, memes, GIFs, we always add those things to computer mediated communication. And sometimes that was studied as that's just something separate from the task of communication. But I've been arguing in my work that we should instead add another layer to what the computer does and understand that there's a libidinal layer to why people use the computer to talk to the people that they love.
Mhm.
Some of it is just, oh, well, I have a phone in my pocket. They have a phone in my pocket. That's the easiest way to communicate, right? But then you make these intentional choices. Am I going to use Snapchat? Am I going to use Instagram? Am I going to use Facebook? Am I going to text? Am I going to answer their messages, right? And a lot of those things aren't necessarily rational decisions. They're effective libidinal decisions. How does it make you feel when you know you have to communicate with someone, right? I have a relative who's calling me every day now, and I don't answer the phone because I know what they want. Right. Right. That simple rational act of pressing the button to answer the phone and letting the wires transmit the message, or the Wi-Fi radio in this case, transmit that message from their phone to mine. I have completely short-circuited that process because I feel some type of way. Right. And so even though art is absolutely the domain of feeling some type of way, I'm curious as to how that excess of life translates itself into the works that y'all create. Does that make sense? And some of it.
Say that one more time.
I'm curious as to how that excess of life, that need to be expressive beyond the simple formal transmission of thoughts and words, the efficient transmission, right? Like the 3 words, if I say to you, Kahlil, if I say, I love you, right? Those are 3 words. Is it 7 letters or 9? I can't count, right? I think Music Soul Child did a song about it one time, right? But those letters, those words are themselves signs that signify something else. The alphabet is a sign system that we string together to form words that we say we have meaning. But then I can invest those 3 words with multiple meanings. It can be a friend love. It can be an associate love. It can be a love of your artistic talent, right? It could be a love of the fact that we're here together having this conversation, right? And so all those things can be captured in that simple formal phrase, I love you, right? And that's the part that really fascinates me. What is it about those excess emotions that your work is trying to capture? That not even excess emotions, right? Because it's not an excess emotion, to be honest. It's just feelings. It's visceral, right? It's libidinal, as Simone said really well. It's orgasmic in some ways. You said this too, ecstatic, right? What is it about these mediums that make you want to put that excess emotion in these particular forms?
I don't know how to do anything else. That's the main thing.
I love that answer though.
It's true though. And Toni Morrison said that one time, that she could read and she could write. And I was like, that sounds right. And I feel like, you know, poetry's been talking about whether or not we actually express ourselves for decades now.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, for me, there is a sense in which the poetry, the words that I say about myself, or the way in which my life becomes material for the poems, it doesn't really necessarily have to do everything. It's not all about me, because in a way, no, it can't be. It's figuration. Yeah, because what I'm trying to think about is the structure of feeling, in a way, right? Like what it is about the conditions of life that cause these things to emerge in a single person. And I'm just one of those people. I can't feel nobody else's feelings, but I do know that other people experience the conditions that I feel, you know, like the title of this book, Or On Being the Other Woman, you know, like when I first said that was going to be the title, it was like a small talk that I was giving. And, you know, it was in Germany, and they said, that's a terrible title. It's a cliche. And I said, no, these are words that we all know, but let's consider how they might, the book is about those words together. And, and so it can't just be, I'm just like, in a way, it's just, I'm like a medium or something, it's not like anybody speaks to me or anything.
The words right here, right.
Yeah, but the whole purpose of like study for me, the whole purpose of like trying to do anything is because I do want to be a medium, through which we can explore these different feelings that, are not cataloged, that we are not entitled to, that we, we think we have to keep in our pockets, and whatever, and, conduct relations. Even I'm older than folks who conduct their primary relationships by digital means, and so for me, it's still totally baffling, to conduct a relationship via text message. It's like all kinds of misfires and confusion. And it's very hard for me to have feelings in that medium. And so, but to try and conduct anyway, right? To continue to be conductive or something like that. I also I don't mind being upset. I really don't. And it's not like I wish to be miserable, but being upset is part of being alive. And why wouldn't I be upset? There are terrible things happening. But also I feel love, and I feel, I love to be in love. I love, no matter how difficult it is. And I don't recognize.
Let's talk about how dope Kahlil is as an artist and how groundbreaking his work is.
Yeah.
Just in case anybody's listening.
What do we do? Like,
how
do we get people to talk about it? Can we ask people to just say in the chat?
Okay, I need to hear Kahlil's answer on this, because there's something magical to me about the fact that you can fix your hands to create things out of the air and mud. Okay, I know it's not mud, but you know what I mean.
It's mud.
And clay, right. But also that you're moving towards transforming the digital in similar ways, right? And so why those mediums? Like, how are you doing this? What dark arts have you tapped into, and why these particular forms to express them?
When I was in college, well, I had to put my grill in just for everybody to know.
I see you.
Going to college, one of my professors said that ceramic can be three things. It can be pottery, it can look like something from life or be fashioned or formed into a found object or something that looks like a found object, and it can look like clay in itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so if the medium of ceramic can do all three of those things simultaneously, that's the dark art I'm touching.
Dark art, right.
Because it's like, that's a place that ain't nobody touched before.
Mm-hmm.
People have done one or two of the three, but no one's been working towards trying to make all three at the same time.
Okay.
I studied abroad in Hungary, which was kind of weird, and a lot of people really don't understand why one would want to go to Hungary. And that was the first place I had ever traveled to internationally. But I'm like always interested in like taking a risk or trying something new, or, just saying, yeah, like I've been taking care of my grandmother and helping her late as she's getting older in her life. And one thing that I've been trying to work on with her is like, can we, like, instead of saying no, or I think about it, like just say yes to like a simple thing and see how your emotion changes about a thing. Well, my grandmother never got on a plane before. And in December, we came to do installation at MoMA, and she said yes. And in that is a part of adding the feeling or adding the extra in the work. I say yes to it. And it gives me so much. And then as the work is shared with a public or an audience, I feel like what you're seeing and what you're engaging is all of that, of what it is giving to me. So
Okay.
it's not necessarily also what I'm pouring into the work, but what the work has afforded back to me. And what you're experiencing is all of part of what it gives to me too.
Okay.
And that space, it's room for not just many entry point into the work, but also many possibilities of presence with the work. And so the ways in which I added or started adding image transfers to the sculptures was like first as an assignment. And then as I've continued to engage and think about the possibilities of what materials and techniques are available to me as a maker through technology development and invention of industrial capacity of production, I'm trying to add more, like as the technology increases and makes more possible, I want to make the sculptures even more possible. But I can only do so much of what I have available to me. So as I get more available to me, the work will also then go that far. It'll continue to go at that speed. And so the image transfers on the sculptures initially were trying to resolve photographs of things as textures. And so then there's a different sense of legibility to an image, similar to a different legibility of a word, as you were sharing, Simone, about the structure of a word meaning or desiring it to mean, or the space for it to do something different than one may expect because of the conditions by which we understand it. You know, then I started layering images on top of each other. And in 2018, the image collages were born because I decided, well, I mean, if a professor told me you should print it on paper, you don't really know what it looked like if you don't print it on paper. But I was like, why do I need to print it on paper if I'm printing it on my sculptures? You know, it's like there was a schism there. But when I started to print them on paper and I started to make wallpapers with the imagery, there's a different capacity of engagement of an image as a texture or something legible when it's on architecture and not just an object that one can have a proprietary relationship with its form. You know, someone can own one of my sculptures, but you can't necessarily own the wall. Okay. And so when you deal with the physical change and the proprietary is removed from one's experience, and then, or the possibility of proprietorship can be removed from one's experience, they have to submit. And so maybe through that submission, you can maybe get more access to maybe some of the content that I'm sharing.
I love that. I love that. I have an Andre question. My friends who are on the stream know me well. You guys don't know me as well, but I probably will never have this opportunity to ask this question again. So I want to ask, what does it mean to work as an artist in a space that's so premised upon the white gaze and translation for the white psyche, right? How do you articulate your blackness, your sexuality, your sensuality in ways that can be translated, or do you prefer to leave them inscrutable in a way that defies explanation or easy translation? You can say no to this question. I ain't trying to get at y'all money. Right? But I'll never have the chance to ask this question again. So I have to ask. And one reason, okay, so let me put myself on Front Street, right? When I first started doing this work, because I write about blackness in the digital, right? I refused to put blackness in my titles of my articles and my chapters, right? I would say race, right? Or say culture, right? Because I knew if I put black in the title, certain types of people, more tech people, would be turned off, right? At the same time though, I did a trick, right? Where, because titles in my field usually are a phrase, then a colon, and then an explanation of what's going on in the article. Like, I'll give you an example. One of my most highly cited articles starts off with a title, "From the Black hand side," right? Colon, "Twitter as a cultural conversation." See, you already understand, right? And so the article has gotten cited a lot. Thank you, Jesus, and the people who love to write, right? But I also understand that there are many people who didn't cite it because they weren't clear that I was specifically talking about race from the title, that I was talking about blackness from the title, right? They didn't cast a joke. And I bring this question up in part because, one, I'm mad I can't touch your sculptures, Kahlil. We're going to talk about that. But two, I was listening, Simone, to some people working through your poetry, and just, it's in the background, and all of a sudden this comment pops up. Somebody says, "Well, what does it mean for the pot to call the kettle black?" I don't understand that phrase. And the other person was trying to explain to them exactly what it meant, the idiom, the thing about how you ain't got no room to talk about me because your life dirty too. And I was just struck by the fact that something that is so commonplace to how I live and move through the world can be inscrutable to an audience that I depend upon in many ways to get this work out, to popularize this work, right? And so I want to ask this troublesome question, which you feel free to demur, right? To say, I ain't touching that, right? But do you ever stop to think about that translational moment, whether you need to, or whether you particularly persistently step away from that translation in order to remain inscrutable?
Kahlil?
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, Kahlil may have more, I don't think that anybody really cares what I say.
I disagree with that. You got
Okay.
19,000 awards. You
mean,
were a teacher at an Ivy League university, so we know that's not true. No self-deprecation.
I believe that, though. Do you hear what I'm
Okay.
saying? I believe it, and in a way, I write with the sense that no one's listening, and especially when I'm writing prose, I feel like there's about 30 Black people who I'm writing to, and that audience is so small, and the points may be so obscure that any other sort of uptake of it may have more to do with racism than what I have actually said.
Mm-hmm.
I know that is not a popular view, but there's so little room in I mean, I teach it. I think my job is amazing. I have this great job at Penn, which affords me the ability both to write poems and to kind of identify primarily as an artist. It's a very, very rare job in an English department for a poet.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is, and I'm very grateful for it. But also, I suspect that I recognize that it was time, for the department to diversify its poetics offerings. Let's put it that way. And and it wasn't because I was, I don't have any delusions about my exceptional abilities.
You're a Gen Xer, ain't you?
I was born in 1972.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I do kind of operate under the delusion that I'm talking primarily to Black people.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I know that the audience for my poems is primarily white people.
Mm-hmm. That's beautifully said. Kahlil, so much of your interiority is made manifest in your sculpture. Are you signifying? Are you being inscrutable? Are you an open book for us to read? Like, what you want?
I mean, that's the hard part, right? I mean,
Right.
there's so much room for it all. And I think that that's one thing that's really exciting. And I really appreciate the space that you shared right now, sharing that with us about how you engage and operate. Because in some ways, I would love to be able to have the similar affinity and delusion, but being born to a mixed parentage, there's a certain part of my physicality that will always relate to a certain group of people that I cannot untether myself to. So it doesn't matter if I feel or think a certain way, because it always is. And like it's
I'm
been
willing to
11
fight you
years.
on that one.
What'd you say? You think
I'm
you
willing
can
to-
absolve yourself of somewhere where
I'm
you
willing
come
to-
from?
I mean, I come from Louisiana, right? And Louisiana is a long line of miscegenation, right? Long legacy of that. But I find that light-skinned people, even the biracials, or as my Twitter timeline calls them, the birascals, right? Because we have to fight to be hailed as Black by both Black communities and white communities, many of us turn out to be more militant in our Blackness than other people,
Well, true.
right?
I feel like, and I feel like I'm quite militant. I mean, I feel like I'm quite militant.
You got fronts on and you from the Lou. Come on now. Like,
I mean, and part of it also is a part of relationships. But I mean, this is like the closest thing to jewelry I will get. Like, I ain't getting no piercings, but I get some golds.
okay.
I won't pierce my ears. My little brother pierced his ears, and my twin little sister, she got her nose pierced.
The 14-year-olds?
You can call their mama. But in terms about audience for the work, I make a lot of room for place for, like, there's a certain side of science, like there's a certain kind of quietness that exists when one may see something in the work. And a certain audience may not necessarily have the repertoire to understand the screenshot of a Goody Mob Outcast video.
Right.
But you see the screenshot and you see something in motion that you see still, but there's only a certain capacity by which an eye is able to also understand that. As you referenced in the beginning of our meeting this evening, of a certain kind of dance off in the Zoomosphere, you know, certain moves would only necessarily be able to be understood even in this gesture, or of the gesture of this frame. So,
like, even watching our ad. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I spoke over you.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's a lot. And I think battling with going to school and 2 PWIs, I just got to a point where I won't be out. I just threw my hands up. I said, it's never going to work for you that I'm here. And it's never going to work for me to search for you to tell me or give me what I need from this experience. So I'm going to go where I need to go and do what I need to do and submit to the process of this fabrication, these fabrication techniques that I've been studiously engaging in, to find a place for myself to situate autonomously. And I think that that's one thing that's quite beautiful of making art and making art of all kinds. The things then have an autonomous life of their own. And so when I walk into the Museum of Modern Art, it is no longer about me dealing with the audiences of seeing what I'm doing, because I have no control over it once it enters the public sphere. And so if I allow it its autonomation of existence, then I can engage with who I want to speak to, no matter who accesses or enters the work in and itself.
It's so interesting that you put it in terms of like being in predominantly white institutions, because it may be that I can't even talk about it anymore. That the impact has been so great that, you know, the sort of automatic sense that there is no engaging with the institutional context, really, that it cannot be really engaged. And therefore, you can narrow your focus to the sort of autonomous life of the thing that you're trying to make. It's super interesting to think of it in those terms. Almost, I hate to use this term, but it's almost like it's a learned response, right? That I cannot, I can't fix this. What I can do is handle what's in front of me right now. And I think that's a very interesting way of thinking about it.
But one part of it too is I bought my house in St. Louis by a suggestion of a mentor. I recently returned home full time to deal with this 100-year-old building that I've started to pay off from the bank. I'm tethered to I'm not autonomous from anything if my building ain't paid off. And I ain't autonomous from the city if I still got to pay taxes. And then I ended up digging myself into a deeper ditch, and I bought a big building for my studio, and it has a half an acre of land behind it. I still got to pay tax on the land. So if the taxes don't necessarily increase, can I build on the land and kind of get more out of a little? And then can that be space in which I engage? That then can be a space where I can gather people, that then I can control the audience, that then can the work then have space to exist out, in maybe in a more complicated space in relationship to Andre's question. What are the controls and the variables by which expression and content is understood and expressed?
I think if you ask 3 different Black artists or Black intellectuals who they think their audience is and what their aspirations are, it's so different. I'm always shocked by the things people say about their belief in the sort of Black social world. I'm continuously shocked when, Andre, I have a friend and graduate student who I work with, who when they first started talking to me about Black Twitter, I said, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no such thing. And today we know that that's even more true, but it's the belief that holds people in that space. And I just think it's fascinating. We really do all believe different things about the possibilities for engagement with other people, other Black people, other women, other Black, and to hear Kahlil talk about, the sort of deep structure of trying to build audience is, it's really interesting because it's a struggle. It's a continuous struggle from my perspective.
And one thing I'd also like to add, and the part of the conversation that was published today through the Museum of Modern Arts magazine with Thelma Golden and Legacy Russell, I shared quite a bit in that, but one part that I wish that I was able to add, I spoke a lot about artists who live and worked on the periphery in relationship to education and institutionalization and institutional participation while they were living, and their understanding of that. One thing that I'd also like to share with this kind of recognition of my work and participation and engagement and presentations in different spaces and how my work occupies space and engages audience. Through this wrestle of dealing with the decorative and with contemporary art, a lot of my amassment sculptures, people want to buy them and put them in encyclopedic decorative art collections in relationship to craft or different conversations of production. And through this battling of contemporary art collection, decorative art collection, blah, 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 I realized that I don't need to have that battle anymore, because the sculptures, as you were making comment about them being constructed in relationship with found object, their best audience is amongst other objects. And so I've stopped being angry about my work moving into decorative art collections, because then I can go into the museum and tell the curators to use the objects in the collection to tell the story about what my work means. And so then is the audience the other objects it sits in concert with? That is not, I mean, of course, we need the audience of people to go and see and start to work to decipher it. But if it sits in a certain kind of timeline, it is also able to kind of resolve itself, almost as if it's an equation. And we're searching for X and Y.
I love
Because if
that.
we could put the whipping, like if you could put a set of Chinese vases, Netherlandish garniture, one of my sculptures, and a whipping post, you know, like could this be the next evolution of what Fred Wilson was very beautifully and complicatedly trying to work through, mining the museum? You know, could my work be a part of that evolution and that conversation of institutional realignment and reconstruction?
I'm gonna shift us over with that profound thought, because I'm still trying to digest it, but of course your work can be part of that. Let's be clear.
Yeah.
Right. But I want to shift us over to the audience Q&A. I believe Melania is gonna share with us questions from that came up in the question and answer part of the Zoom box. So if y'all gonna read them out loud, go ahead and get on that.
Thanks, Andre. And thank you, all three of you, for this amazing conversation. So we do have a few questions. Some of them are directed to all of you, and some of them are directed to just one of you. So this one is for everyone, from Michael McLeod. What is your first memory of artwork being meaningful for you, and why did that artwork resonate with you?
Now, you know I ain't going first.
Okay, I'll go first. In 1999, 2000, there was an exhibition about historical cultural dress from around the world. And I was 7 or 8 years old, and I went to the St. Louis Art Museum for the first time. And I remember seeing objects and clothes from around the world and imagining people inside them, and how those items could have been activated. And emotionally, I was a bit scared because I didn't really know or understand the power that they had. But now looking back, through my experience of living through the world, I start to know the power of those objects. And I think back that fear was also a certain kind of excitement or desire or yearning to be close to the power that those objects had. More specifically, a lot of the objects and clothes from West Africa, you know, that were produced for cultural production, that like an art that is only activated through verb, you know, that it's a collective experience through which the clothes and the human interaction is what activates art and makes art. And that is something that I live with so dearly.
Simone, do you want to answer?
Oh, I can answer. Except, I mean, I guess one of the things I want to say is, like, I think like a lot of people of my generation, visual art came, I feel like I didn't know anything about visual art, but it's not true. It's you know, I was a reader as a very small child. And so the first sort of art things that I knew about were books. But when I also just want to say my mother is from rural Mississippi, from a place about 50 miles north and east of Jackson. And my father grew up in Philadelphia in the Richard Allen housing projects.
Jackson, Mississippi?
Yes.
Okay.
North of Jackson. And, you know, I don't know how my father did this, but he somehow was, you know, he just was like a friendly dude. and so there was always like visual art being made by contemporary Black artists in the house. And I didn't somehow recognize what it was. Like, I just didn't know that that's what was in the house. And I don't know, I find it baffling now that I didn't really understand that I was living with art objects. I just did not get it. And yeah, I don't know. It's like really interesting and mysterious how it didn't register to me that that's what was happening, and that I could only identify in some ways with books as a kid.
At what point did you realize you were living with this art?
My dad was a lawyer, and he at some point became involved with the sculptor Selma Burke as her attorney, and took me to her studio, I think, as a kid, a little kid. Maybe I was 9 or something. And I, at some point, maybe she gave him a drawing or something like that. And I was like, this is the kind of stuff we had. Like it wasn't until I was in the studio and he was like, this is an artist, and I was like, well, we actually have, other kinds of drawings and paintings and stuff around the house. And I kind of started to put it together then, but it really, I don't even know how to explain it. If you do not come from a family where being an artist is not a possibility, where art is not part of the conversation about how people live their lives, it might not penetrate your reality, and I think that is part of what was happening as when I was a kid.
I totally agree. It didn't matter how much I read, doesn't matter how much I looked, doesn't matter how many things I did. I totally agree. I mean, I went to the art museum and still didn't know that it was like a thing to do.
Yeah.
Even though I got to know who Getty Simone was. I got to know who Gordon Clark was, Ellsworth Kelly. But I think one thing that I did recognize when seeing those artists work in high school, that they were dealing with those artists specifically, Gordon Clark, Getty Simone, Bruce Nauman, not Ellsworth Kelly, maybe Ellsworth Kelly, but they were really battling with something of the real that was less decorative in a way. Like Gordon Clark cutting up houses, and like after his death, they're putting them in the museums, like this is art, but this is like literally also a fragment of someone's house. Like this is house art, and what is that? Like when looking at it, I'm like, no, but this is house. But then they're telling you that it's art. And so how do you wrestle with that too in a certain kind of not only perception of life, but also a kind of immaturity of life, or of abstraction, I would say, not just necessarily of immaturity of life, but a certain level of immaturity of engagement with a certain kind of abstraction. It's beautiful, but also complicated. And that's like the power also and the beauty of a place like the Studio Museum in Harlem.
Mm-hmm. Andre, do you want to jump in?
I'm a Philistine. I can't answer like this. I'm good. I'll take the next question.
Okay.
For 400, please.
Next question is for Andre. I'm curious.
I didn't mean that seriously.
I mean it seriously. I'm sorry if I pronounce your name wrong. From Juicy. I'm curious about Andre's emotional and mental thought processes of embracing a concept, meaning the libidinal, from such a flawed or possibly harmful person, meaning Freud. That's the question. I
mean, it's late, right? So I could deploy the Nene Leakes meme. I said what I said, but I'm not gonna do that.
Well, but you did say also acknowledging and like using it not necessarily in relationship to.
Look at Kahlil with the same. That's what I'm talking about. No, I don't really rock with Freud or Deleuze-Guattari or even Jung in their conceptions of the libidinal, in part because I find French post-structuralism and psychological theory, psychology theory that I encountered in English grad school to be impenetrable. Instead, I picked someone else who's impenetrable, which is Fred Moten and Frank Wilderson and Francois Lyotard, right? So libidinal economy, not just the libidinal, right? And so anti-Blackness was my path to libidinal economy. And if you start from anti-Blackness, where it says the entire world is fucked up because it placed the Black in a position of abjection, right? Where the Black is not even capable of being alienated because the Black is not human, then I don't really care what Freud said. I've already been denied my humanity. The fact that this man was problematic and came up with a concept that other people use doesn't really impinge upon my consciousness, because I'm now wrestling with the idea that I have to re-articulate myself from a framework of Western modernity that says I should not exist nor enjoy the fruits of my labor. Or if I listen to the Afro-pessimist, my desire to even want to be seen and heard is pathological, right? So I'm wrestling with these not from an emotional or an intellectual level, but from a spiritual and epistemological level, trying to figure out how I can come to be in these spaces, in these worlds, right? So I appreciate your question. I apologize for being sharp in my answer, but that particular concern that a bad man came up with a concept that somebody used is the history of the United States. We are always already enmeshed in non-innocent infrastructures, and my decision to be an agent in the space of those infrastructures does not depend upon the record of what has been, but upon what I do from this point forward, right? So your question is sharp, your question is on point, but my answer also is sharp. I'm much more concerned with discussing Black being as becoming than worrying about whether Freud had problems with his mama.
Thank you. I feel like that's what we needed to hear tonight. Thank you. So we're gonna close with one question. Let's see. There are a lot of questions here. Okay.
Well, and I also appreciate Simone sharing in an article, in some text that she shared with us, and bringing up Hegel too. Because in graduate school, we had to read essays by Hegel in my seminar class. And then my other seminar class, my other professor gave us his article on Africa. And then, it's like how the juxtaposition of dealing with it as like an authority or someone of renowned, but then also recognizing the problematics and how does one exist. And it was like 3 people in the class with my advisor in graduate school, and it was like required to go to the seminar class with the other professor. And then so
I also, I'm not offended by French structuralism. I am a fan of Deleuze and Guattari, and I enjoy my Foucault. But I'm not embarrassed by, I love the way you put it, Andre. That's all I had to say about it. And I refuse to be, not denied my 1,000 plateaus. Because it gives me joy.
Amazing.
Thank you so much. I mean, in a less sharp answer, talking about the libidinal allows me to talk about joy that is untethered from rationality.
Yes.
Right. And that is super important to me, because so much of the world, in the words of Akil Mbembe, is designed to desiccate me, to suck the life from me, right? Through ostensibly rational and modernistic processes. And it's only by paying attention to the libidinal that I've been able to excavate the joys of Black Twitter, the pleasures of twerking, right? The power in Black girls being able to do hair in front of their stove, not because they're trying to get a sponsorship contract on YouTube, but because they love the aesthetics of Black womanhood and fashion and style as articulated through the sculptured tresses that they create with the curling iron and some Black edge control gel, right? And so the libidinal allows me to talk about those joys in ways that other modes, even affect, other ways of doing so, don't give me that same freedom.
I'm so glad I get to come to this talk to take notes.
Shut up.
Me too.
Look, I'm trying to learn, baby. I am so privileged. It's such a privilege to be amongst these minds, so that I too can continue to grow and sharpen my tools.
Agree. we're
Tools
gonna
of language and tools of
close.
thought.
We're gonna close in 1 minute. Thank you, all three of you, and thank you to the
Thank you.
audience.
Thank you so much.
Of course. So I have a closing question. What does your daily search for ecstasy look like?
I'll be honest and say, even though I think that joy is a state of intentionality, you have to work towards it. It's not something that automatically descends upon you. I will say that I find ecstasy in the unexpected interactions on Twitter, right? In part because they're so surprising. They come out of nowhere. They come out of the most mundane and banal observations, right? Somebody just said on Twitter while we were talking, some things should have been kept in the drafts, and somebody responded to her, like your wedding pictures. That's some savage shit. Right? But in that moment, you see my physical reaction, like I'm not acting out for y'all. I literally did that when I read that, because that brought me this intense catharsis, this release of joy that I wasn't prepared for, but I kind of was, because I'm on Twitter when I'm supposed to be doing this work, right? And so for me, that's how I find my ecstasy, and those unexpected delights that I get by being a habitual offender on Twitter.
Well, Kahlil's going to get the last word. So I will just say quickly, I feel like I feel like I get a lot of joy out of being a mother. It's so hard. It is so hard. But yeah, my son just brings me so much joy that I just never anticipated feeling. You know, because it's so hard. It's just like when it comes right, it's just so amazing. So amazing.
I may be like a little vulnerable and like say a little bit more maybe than I should, but I've been battling like depression almost all my life. And I think it's not been necessarily till recently that I've been able to even communicate and like acknowledge ecstasy and joy in my life. And as I've gotten to a point where I am able to recognize my autonomy, recognize the spaces where I have freedom, I don't necessarily feel like I get ecstasy every day, or I mean, I think I find joy, but I also don't necessarily equate joy and ecstasy in the same capacity. And the like depth by which ecstasy can enthrall one's body or like captivate one's emotional space, I don't know. Like, I feel like that's so much more visceral and enthralling that kind of like thwarps your body. Like ecstasy like really is just like a whole nother. And I think at this point in my life, I'm getting to a point where I can have access to the possibility of getting to that level of being. I don't know if we know that as a young person, you know, but as I turned 30 yesterday, and I feel like I have like, I tell people like, oh, you're 30, woo, woo, woo. And I'm like, yeah, but like.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Okay.
But when I was younger, living to be 30, I didn't know was even an option. And in thinking in that, I find it's ecstasiatic. It's also scary because you have, like people keep saying, think about what can be, not what necessarily hasn't been. And that's fun. That's exciting. And also helping just stewarding and supporting this, like my grandmother's life is the rest of her life is like, that's a place where it's like a tough ecstasy, but it's like a place that I could never not be. Like I have to be there. And I think when you make choices that you don't have a choice with, I think that's there it is. Like you can't choose to necessarily be a mother. And you can't necessarily, you can, but when you are present, you're there and no one can take that from you. And that is important. And so thank you all so much for being here this evening. And thank you both for being here to be in conversation with me.
Thank you so much,
Happy
Kahlil.
birthday, young man. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Kahlil.
Happy birthday.
Thank you so much.
30, you halfway to dead, right?
I'm going to pass this on to Dayan so that she can give us our closing remarks. Thank you so much.
I feel like we all need to do a collective like exhale, or I think I was holding my breath by the end because it was just, it was so rich. And I feel like I need to name that we need like slow, sustained, steady drippings of joy, like today, tomorrow, all the time. And I just want to thank you, Kahlil, and you, André, and you, Simone, for letting us witness your insights, your wisdoms and your spirits over the last like hour and a half. This program was such a treasure to work on, and we are grateful to all of you for holding and sharing space with us tonight. And I'm also just reflecting on the richness of this night, and also reflecting on the fact that we were gathering together this time last year to close out Project Scared Bradley, and thinking about where we were all at then and the unknowingness before us last spring. And so, you know, as we think about moving into this new season, I want to make a challenge to all of those here, a challenge for you, a challenge for myself to say yes to it. And then I pass it along to Hannah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kahlil, André, Simone, and Dayan. I wanted to say a final thank you to all the staff that made this program possible, to the wonderful, incredible ASL interpreters here tonight, to the MoMA AV staff, Jeff and Zach, and to the MoMA and the Studio Museum and Harlem Public Program staff, Adelia, Melania, Tennille, Brianna, and Naomi. Thank you so much for making this program possible and come to life. To the curatorial team, Thelma Golden and Legacy Russell.
And
as well.
Elena.
And Elena.
Heller.
And
Angelique.
Thank you, Kahlil. We will follow up over email with a survey for tonight's program. We want to continue to learn and hear from you. And we'll also include a code for free admission so you can come visit MoMA on any day of your choosing. And we hope you'll come see Project Kahlil Robert Irving in its final days. It's open through May 1st. And with that, I just wanted to say thank you again, and we'll close with a collective goodbye. We'll invite you to unmute yourself and say goodbye and cue some final music. So thank you all once again. Have a good night.
Goodbye.